I'm Jesse Spencer Smith, and I'm a Chief Data Scientist, Director of the Data Science Institute. I'm also Associate Dean for the College of Connected Computing. And we're here for AI Summer. We're going to be covering essentials of AI frameworks. We're going to be talking a lot about AI agents. And by the end, we would like for people to actually be producing AI solutions. So I will mention, if you're interested in going even in greater depth, we now are working through approvals for an AI master's and also a generative AI graduate certificate. So those are going to be options in the future. These sessions are meant to be technical in nature and sort of to get you up and running. But if you want to go whole hog and take a deep dive, there's going to be an opportunity to do that. This master's degree will be online. It'll be in person in coming years, but we're starting out fully online. So I would like to start first of inviting people. Thank you all who turned on your video. It's so much easier to present when people have their video on and also to see one another. If you're willing to turn on your video, we'd love to see you. When you respond, you're welcome to unmute and answer, or you can put your answers into chat as well. Either is fine. And I invite anybody, if I do miss any mentions on chat that I need to be getting to, feel free to bring that to my attention, especially Umang and Miranda. Before I jump into I'm going to start with a recap of last week, and I have some quiz questions for the people who are here on Tuesday. Are there any questions before we get started? All right, then let's dive in. So I'm going to show you a video. That you may, if you were in the first session, you will remember this. I'm going to frame up my share, and just so I can block this out correctly. So give me a moment to get this about right. There we go. All right, I'm going to allow the startup of AI Companion. Do know that we're going to be making our own summary of all of this material, so you may want to use that one instead. Okay. All right, so here we go. We're going to take a look at AI chat versus AI agent. If you were here on Tuesday, you'll have seen this. So let's go and just watch through and see what happens here. On the left is what happens when you put in a prompt like that into chat. On the right, same prompt, but something else happens. A whole lot else happens. One thing to note, it's not as fast, right? Sometimes it can take a long time. Sometimes it can work for hours. It seems to be accessing files, even an Excel file, doing some work on it. It created a visualization. It actually came up with a diagnostic report. All right, let me ask you, name something, and anybody's open for this, name one thing that the agent is doing that the chat is not.
It's summoning skills.
Skills. Okay, so that's important. So it's able to pull up skills, and we're going to talk about that. What else?
Interacting with other systems and data
It,
sources.
Absolutely right. So it actually had access to a file system. It had access directly. So we saw it was actually pulling up files directly from somewhere and also accessing other systems. Now, accessing other systems, this chat didn't do it, but maybe it can. What else? What else? Planning. All right. You saw before it responded, it actually, here we can dial it back a little bit here. Interesting thing here, before it started responding, it said analyzing the request, and then it came up with a task plan. Okay, excellent. Let's see what else. Yes, it was grabbing files, absolutely. Yes, and somebody noticed it might have been spinning up other agents. So On the top level, the difference between chat and an agent, some things are in common. You've used chat before where the chat was able to go off and like do a web search. Sometimes you've even used chat where it wrote code to solve a problem and then gave you the answer. But there are the things that the agent is doing that the chat simply does not do. Chat can't spin up chat sub chats. You're dealing with one LLM, and generally that LLM has access to what is in its context window and only what it's in its context window. You don't have stuff going on like you saw here where uh, it's pulling up files on its own, right? And then doing things with the files. So chat has access to its context window. It can call on other tools to do work in that context window, but that's all it's got. Agents, on the other hand, can apparently do more. Can somebody tell me what is this about skills? What does this mean? We talked about it some last time, but when it says skills manufacturing process, what does that mean? Okay, so Atlantic skill could be a system prompt, right? So that's one thing it can be. It's more than that, isn't it? What else is it? And somebody can unmute if you need to explain a little bit more. This is a lot to type out. So I had a repeatable task be used for other contexts. Absolutely, absolutely. What else? And again, feel free to unmute if you want to, or put it into chat. Good loop. Hey Cheryl, can I put you on the spot? What do you know about skills? And you can unmute if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I use it a lot for something that's a repetitive task. Like I have a committee calendar of 7 committees I have to put together every year. I give it the parameters and the input, and then it spits out the committee calendar. So it calls on what it needs to complete the task.
I see. And did you build this skill? Did you give it like an additional background and understanding of what's required?
Yeah, so you're not having to repeat it in the chat window constantly.
Mhm.
So I gave it last year's committee calendar. I told it when each committee meets, when those people, which people are on the committees, which can't overlap. I gave it a copy of the academic calendar so it didn't select meeting dates on holidays and so
So
forth.
that's a whole lot. So you actually gave it, and then what did you use to create this skill?
I was in Cowork.
Uh-huh. And then did you pull up something special to create the skill?
Um, Actually, I used the skill creator skill.
Skill creator skill.
Skill creator skill. That's it. Very
Yes.
meta, right?
I have
So there's a
zero
skill,
programming experience.
which
So,
now that's another critical thing because what you created would look like on the outside a very complex software solution. Very complex. Complex optimization of schedules, background. So you had satisficing conditions, you had, soft conditions, you had to access multiple different types of resources. Very complex. But what you did was you created a skill using Skill Creator. Skill Creator is itself a skill, which helps you create other skills. Fantastic. This is great. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what this looks like from sort of an architectural view. All right. We're going to take a look at an architectural view. Questions before we questions as we jump into the architectural view. All right, let's dive in. How is it possible for an agent to do so much more than a chat? Well, here's a chat. Uh, We talked a little bit in depth about this on the first day. All of these are in the notes that you have available to you. So go back, you can watch the recording. It's all on the repo, or you can read the lecture notes. But essentially what's going on here, you have an LLM, you have a generative AI model. That's to the left. It has your prompts, it has some architecture that allows it to do some things, and then it has responses. Chat response. That's what it's doing. But in addition, it has access to tools. So if you ask questions that the model does not believe that it would know, it will actually do an internet search and then put that information back into the context and then continue your answer. So, so a chat does have access to some things. It even can have access to skills. So it can call on a skill so it can understand something better, but there are limits. The skill is only going to be the everything has to land within context, and there's only so far it can go before it's going to respond to you. So chat can take actions, but it's not going to have an extensive access to file system. It's not going to be able to continue to work for a long, long period of time. So what does it look like? What does an agent look like? Here's an agent. So, and I call this agent ecosystem 2.0 because we had agents, we've had them for a while, but generally they had to be handcrafted. Agents had to be built out of the LLMs. You handled what was called the orchestration. When does it get called? What does the interface look like? Agents 2.0 much more flexible, and they come in different guises. So, Cheryl, you just mentioned Claude Cowork. We're going to look at that in a moment. Claude Cowork is an agent, what I would call an agent 2.0. Just to be clear, nobody else is calling these agent 2.0. That's just me. But otherwise, it's too confusing, right? It's like we say, "Oh, I know agents. I can tell you, I have been bamboozled so many times when I get promised by a vendor that yes, they support agents, and I look at it and say, you're talking about agents from like 2024. These are not what I meant." So I'll say agent 2.0. What is an agent 2.0? Well,
Can we
it is a
say
model.
second generation agent?
Please, a second generation agent. Absolutely. Absolutely. So here you have the LLM, right? And Ken Rule, I think you've had access with agents sort of all the way along. So you know what they looked like in the bad old days, way long ago in 2024, in early 2025. So now you have the AI, but now around the AI, you have a harness. The harness is handling things like access to a subdirectory. So this is access to that file system where you can read documents, you can create documents, you can run code if you're running in the command line. So this is how you get access to all these things. And you can also have specialized documents like memory or tasks. A next generation agent, an agent 2.0, can actually keep track of what it's doing, make a plan, create a document that looks like a task list, and then keep on track because it keeps on referring back to the task list. It can create sub-agents that can handle tasks off of that task list. It might create a knowledge graph. It probably has a form of memory that it's going to be using so it can keep track of what's happening. And it can access skills. So depending on the access that you give an agent, it can have access to the file system, and it can even do things outside of that. It could write code, execute code, take action on your behalf. You can even give it permission to do things like operate your computer. You can say, all right, I'm handing the keys over, run my computer, or run my session, my browser session. That's an agent 2.0. And they're not specialized. You spin up an agent, it's not specialized, it doesn't know anything. But Cheryl, if you need the agent to know all about your scheduling and who you have to schedule and who's different, then you create skills. So when you spin up an agent, it has a task and it can say, oh, this is all about scheduling for my organization. I have an organization skill. I have a scheduling skill. Let me pull it up and put that into my context. Now you have a specialized agent. So in the first generation of agents, you built them to be highly specialized. Now you can use them interactively and they become specialized as they pick up one or more skills to pick up the domain knowledge and the process knowledge to carry out tasks. So that is the difference between an, a chat, which is great, with tools. They're great. You know what this is like. You've been doing this a ton, versus agents, which is a whole different ballgame. Let me pause here. What questions do you have about agents versus about chat versus agents?
Jesse, can agents unlearn things that they learn? Like if they use a certain skill and we figure out it's not compatible with what we're trying to do they remember it for a while or can we make them forget it? I don't know if I'm explaining things the right way.
No, you're explaining it beautifully, as a matter of fact. So keep in mind what happens with skills. Skills themselves get pulled and brought into the context, right? So that's actually so the top part, and you're going to be diving into this today. But the top part of the skill, we're going to take a look at the architecture and everything. But one thing that happens is definitely it enhances the prompt. It puts stuff into the prompt, but it also makes other tools available. So the model is not being trained, it's not being changed. However, if it adds something into memory, then it might remember something about it. But the fact is, once the agent is done, if you spin up another agent, it's only going to know what's in its memory, right? So actually, and that's actually a really good trick. If you need to do something, you pull up an agent and now you need to do a subtext, but you don't want it to be polluted with this context up here, you spin up a sub agent and you don't give it the skill. And then it has no greater knowledge than it did before. The only memory that this system has is right here. Everything else is sort of fed to it, right? So the memory is the only thing which is persistent over subsequent runs. So when I introduce skills, the one thing I say skills are like downloading knowledge, and so you have new capabilities you didn't have before. How many people here saw the Matrix movies? Do you remember? So you can do a virtual thumbs up. Yeah, exactly right. And do you remember the very first movie? Neo gets plugged in for the first time, and he says, "I know jujitsu," right? It's like all of a sudden he knows jujitsu, right? Well, the difference here is that the model forgets jujitsu. As soon as it's over, it doesn't retain that knowledge. Neo retained the knowledge. He was fed knowledge and got to retain it. Doesn't happen here unless it's in memory. But other than that, in terms of new capabilities, new ability to do things, absolutely, skills are an excellent way to give the domain knowledge or process knowledge to an agent so it can carry out really complex tasks. What other questions? Wait, so is like Clawbot Clawbot? So Claude, Open Claude, is a persistent agent that maintains memory and is always running and is meant to be communicated with to carry out tasks. Other than that, they're very similar. Plus, it's high. The original Claude, man, Clawbot or OpenClaw was very permissive. It could do anything. It was pretty unsafe. But kind of like this, it could pull up skills as it needed. It had long running memory to remember what you asked at the last time. So very much of the second generation. Andrea.
Hi. I was wondering if memory is the real difference between chat and agents, because it might be possible. So let's suppose that chat has access to the file system. In principle, it could be possible, if impractical, to load everything into the chat, like the skills, the agent's instructions, and so on. But then
Into the context. Into the
yeah,
context.
and then it would be confused about.
Yes.
It was impossible to keep everything in memory, right?
That's right. Well, I mean, you could have a million tokens, and there's an even very recent announcement out what's called the sub Q model. I'm still looking at it myself, which has a token length of 12 million. But you start getting what's called token rot. It is so much to attend to. And remember, with attention, the way that it works is every token is influencing all tokens that come after it. At some point, that becomes too much, right? So could you really load all the documents in? Yep, might be able to, but even better would be a harness that would pull in those selected things that would be important. And to be able to make notes right? About the important things. So it's all, but you're not wrong. It is all about the context and having highly curated context that has exactly what you need in it. So could a chat do a lot of this? Yes, that's what we used to do. We used to load up a whole bunch of stuff. As a matter of fact, if you are in a controlled environment, so I've worked with folks from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and other folks that don't have access to like Claude and the second generation agents. So we actually create skills with them that they dump into context, right? So they're making an agent look a little bit and act a little bit more. I'm sorry, they're taking a chat and making it act a little bit more agent-like. So it's not a bad approach, but you just don't get all the capability. Great question. Other questions? On thoughts on Obsidian serving as a second brain. So if you think about it, Matthew, uh, the harness is sort of handling for that. But if you have Obsidian and you have yourself structured that information through Obsidian, so Obsidian uses Markdown as a native file format. It's a note taker where you can actually create connections between notes. Well, you can have a tool that the agent has access to so it can actually traverse all those. Now, that's really helpful because you can say, oh, if you're calling on this, know that these are the things that are most closely related. It's almost like a cross between a pile of markdown documents and a knowledge graph. And anything that you can do to guide the agent in what it ought to be looking at, then what you're doing is you're curating the context. So yes, actually, it's even more powerful. And I think it's a tremendous way, especially if you make it both ways. If the model finds something, agent finds something which is important and determines that it's connected in a particular way, and it's able to add markdown files and connect them to other markdown files in Obsidian, very powerful. Susan.
So I've had a little bit of exposure to Magic, the new with
Yes.
and I'm trying to understand the differences between Magic and Claude as a
Sure. So
product.
Magic is an internally developed system here by Jules White and Alan Carnes and team. Cool thing is it's level 3 certified, so you can have in Vanderbilt, you can have level 3, which means FERPA related data. So think of that as being much more oriented to development of software solutions, right? So you can use it for general purpose a bit like this, but it's not really intended to be this sort of dynamic agent that you have, access to lots of documents and works interactively. It can, but it is much more about creating software, creating plugins, software that does repeatable things. Now you can use even a general purpose agent for that. And what they built is brilliant at building software. What we're looking at here is more broader than that. Skills are sort of a first class citizen here. And the idea is that you are spinning up a vanilla agent that will take on specializations, develop and spin up sub agents. So think of this as a more generalized architecture. The other thing which is different is that you can have different types of agent interfaces like Claude Cowork. That looks very different from Magic and from anything else as well. So this is the broad idea of an Agent 2.0. Magic is a great example of an Agent 2.0, but one that is especially tuned to creating plugins and software. All right, other questions. And Miranda and Umang, are there any questions that I ought to be answering off of the chat?
There was one question that I saw. What is the graph part in this agent?
Yeah. So we almost touched on that with Obsidian, right? A graph is, I just sort of put this suggestively here. You can create and allow the harness to access information which is in graph format. So think of a knowledge graph. If you have knowledge which has a significant structure, right? This is a natural way to say, hey, agent, go find this and the surrounding important information. So the harness can know really well how to navigate the graph, and that's a good way of getting structured information and the correct information into the context of the agent. It's all about accessing information that that should be in the context for the agent or the sub-agents to work on. And it's meant to be very general because it could be highly structured, or it could be something like Obsidian, which is sort of dealer's choice of how you decide to put this together. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at a skill. All right. Let's take a look at a simple skill that is almost like a prompt. And then let's take a look at a skill that actually calls on code. We good? All right. Excellent. Let's see here. I want to go to, all right. So here's a skill that I built. I was just at Nissan, Nissan Americas, and we built a skill real time using the skill creator. And what they wanted to have was to have a skill that could identify PII, personally identifiable information in a data store. They wanted to be able to do a quick check to see if they needed to be concerned about any of the data. And we'll be talking more about this, but really the two most important things, and this is going to be preloaded. If you have like 5 different skills, each of their names and descriptions will be loaded into the model when it first starts up. The model needs to know about in the context. The model needs to know what skills it'll have available, what skills it'll have available. So, description: identify potential sensitive data fields. So that's sitting up. You spin up an agent. It doesn't have any skill loaded up, but you start the chat and you say, I need to check and see if there's anything sensitive I need to be concerned about in this database, pointer to database. So it's going to look through its context and say, oh, I do have a skill about this. Let me pull in and put into context this skill, which is all about identifying PII. That's what happens. That's what the harness does. It moves it into context because the model says, oh, I need that thing. Okay, when it loads up the skill.md. Notice this is skill.md. And so it has a full description. It checks to make sure that, yeah, this is the thing that it needed to have. And then, just like Neo, getting downloaded with the critical information about jujitsu, it's downloaded with the critical information about PII. Hey, user typically is going to be typing in this, column inventory, a schema dump. Here's what you need to be aware of. The PII is broad: names, government IDs, contacts, biometrics, quasi-identifiers, financial PII, free text columns. PHI, here's what it looks like. Here's to recognize sensitive columns. Here are the confidence levels that you're going to have. You know that it's there. You think it might be low. It may or may not be. Here's the output that you need to give the user when they're ready, when you're ready to report out. Here's some working tips. Right? Don't ask for sample data because, duh, it might have sensitive data. So don't ask for it. Don't invent findings. For very large schema, still produce one report, but maybe group them. Examples of rows. This is what it could look like. So this is downloaded into the context memory. This is where a skill kind of looks like a prompt, right? This is a simple skill, and this is all of this particular skill. All of a sudden, the skill knows jujitsu, the agent knows jujitsu because the skill has been downloaded. So questions about a simple skill, what I call a simple skill that simply informs the model about a particular area.
I have a quick question regarding the skill script. So how does the skill script can access the data? Is it like you run on your cloud editor and you have access to their data set, or they are running this script on their system?
So in this case, remember that skills, well, it's important to know skills are composable. So one thing is you could say, hey, I want to access this schema in this database, and I say, oh, well, here I have a skill which is all about accessing those data schema. And
Okay.
for this, what I want to do is I want to then assess whether this actually has sensitive data. Oh, well, I actually have a skill about sensitive data. And so now the agent can access the data and determine whether it's sensitive data.
Okay.
Or, or you can simply say, hey, check in my subdirectory. I have a schema loaded in my subdirectory, and it's right here. right?
Mhm.
Go and look. Or it may be handled, depending custom sort of setups, you may say, hey, go and get this. It may be a tool that it has access to. It could be any of those things, but it's able to get it, or you copy and paste. Maybe they copy and paste a create table, right? They could
Okay.
just copy but notice that the skill wasn't really it was saying, hey, this is the ways that it could be. Typically, they paste in one of. If it's missing, work with what you have. So this is how skills are composable. It can say,
Yes.
oh, I have access to the schema. Therefore, I'm going to continue. So this is really interesting. This is not composable like, object-oriented programming, right? This is very flexible. This is why I like to think of agents not as software, but as informed intelligences. Here's this, here's this. It has descriptions in both. Figure it out. Other questions?
Jesse, do you have to think ahead on everything that your agent is going to need as far as skills? Like you said, in this instance, being able to look at something and say if it's sensitive data. Do you,
Yes.
or is there like a way to give it a skill that says, figure out the skills that you need to
So
do
this
that?
is where this is the critical part. This is like the main part here, Kayla. It's a great question. And that is, how do you build the skills, right? Here is a great way to build skills, but it depends on where you want to build it. Let's say I want to build a skill that has um, I have like a single white paper that I've written. Maybe it's a couple of dozen pages, but I describe everything that's important. Or maybe I just have a conversation. This is a great way to create it. So if y'all don't know, you can use the Notes app on your iPhone, and there's other things on other phones. And with permission, you could say, "Can I get a transcript of this conversation?" All right. So you grab the transcript and you say, "Okay, Kayla, tell me everything about this task that you're doing. What's the important information you have to know before you can do this task? When you're doing this, what's the part that takes you time? Give me information on all of this. Have the conversation." I could paste that into a chat and then I can say, see the transcript I just pasted and I can be explicit and say, call skill creator skill. Now I could also say, I want to create a skill out of this transcript, and it would probably call skill creator skill. But if you want to make sure it's firing, you can call it by saying slash skill creator. Slash skill will absolutely fire that skill. So you have everything you need in the context. So you could do that. If you're dealing with an expert such as yourself, and it could be yourself, if you know you can state everything about it, you can build a skill that way, and that'll work fine. But there are other ways to make skills as well. If you don't have all of that in one handy dandy single file that you can paste in, and we'll talk about that next. Paris, you have a question?
Yes, so I kind of struggle with how um how much should be in a skill. So I guess when we think about a workflow, we think about individual tasks. So I guess individual tasks would be individual skills.
They might
am
be.
I kind okay.
So this is why the skill creator skill is so fantastic, right? So you could dump a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll talk about dumping a whole bunch of stuff, and you say, I want to create one or more skills out of this. As a matter of fact, if it gets really big, you might want to instead use Cowork, right? So you might use Cowork, and you might choose a subdirectory that has like all of that stuff, all of the files there that you want to build the skill out of. That could be dozens, that could be hundreds of documents where it's like, all right, skill creator skill, help me define a skill or more skills out of these collections of processes. Now, at this point, because you're dealing with Cowork, Cowork is an agent, and Cowork has all of this infrastructure. So you get to load up without trying to put everything in context like you had to with chat. You can have those in the subdirectory, right? Put them all in the subdirectory, do a good job of describing what you want to do, and then you say, skill creator, take the wheel, right? So help me think through. And skill creator will now say, okay, well, I'm going to suggest 3 different skills because of the following. If you wanted to really think hard, then you can actually indicate here that you want to have extended thinking, right? Depending on which model you're using, you can turn on extended thinking and say, consider deeply, work through everything before you make a suggestion. Here's everything we're trying to do. Then kick off skill creator with me. And that'll come up with the plan. Yeah, I saw how it came up with the plan before. It'll come up with the plan. The plan is I'm going to suggest 4 skills. First, I'm going to start with skill number 1. Second skill, I think is pretty well defined. I'm going to sub that. I'm going to put that to a sub agent, but we're going to interact about skill number 1. It'll lead you through the creation of the skill. Here's the thing. Skills created only by the AI, where you don't curate the information, give it the documents, give it the approach, give it the goals, are not that great. Research has shown that if you have an agent create a skill for itself to use, even if it can do research, even if it have access to all the tools, it's just not that great. Skills that represent the knowledge and expertise of the user are successful. Skills, here's the knowledge of the model. Skills are meant to build on top of that, to provide perspective, background, process knowledge that is really only held by the expert, right? The expert built the skill with the AI and now can accomplish so much more, can handle so many more tasks because that reflects their expertise and how problems should be solved. So when you have multiple files, that's when you're going to want to use Cowork to create your skill. Questions about this?
I guess like if you have a certain workflow where you're using maybe like 2 or 3, like you always are using 2 or 3 skills in a row.
Yeah.
Like would it be another skill which kind of lets it know that okay, this is the workflow that you're going to follow and trigger these skills,
Yeah.
or would you save it as a prompt or
No, that's a great
oh,
question. I would do that as and I've done that where I've had a skill that just coordinates the calling of the other skills. Call me when you have this overall task, right? Because it could be that none of the individual skills would ever trigger because the problem that you're solving is a larger problem. So you want to make sure that your skill is going to trigger when you need it and that but it can absolutely coordinate the work. Because keep in mind, what you're really doing is you're informing the second generation agent, this agent 2.0, on how to do that work. And that work may involve multiple skills. So yes, you absolutely can do this. If this sounds like you're building software, in a way you are. I'm thinking of this as the new generation of software. I think this is the way we're going to be solving problems in the future. This is actually how many solutions are going to be built in the future. And the cool thing is, for a large number of these are not going to be, think how we had to operate before. I have this problem. I'm going to use this general purpose software. I'm going to try to make it work for me. Instead, it's going to be, here's how I need to solve the problem. I'm going to make skills that do exactly what I need. So it's kind of cool. All right, other questions, Lori?
Yeah, I think maybe you were just answering it. Like you said, that skills that represent the knowledge of the user are best. So do you create those with the chat or with the agent? You kind of co-create them?
You co-create and think about the creation in the Cowork level. So remember, chat is you paste everything into the context, right, that you need, right? Cowork is you add all the files that you would need. The descriptions could be PowerPoints, could be graphics that you've created. Something you wrote on the back of a napkin. This is what the process looks like, right? But all that is in the subdirectory, and you say, consider this process that is described here. Consider what I'm telling you. Help me create a skill. And finally, if you have something which is extremely code heavy, then you create that with Claude Code. You're going to use Claude Code when the code that the skill that you're creating involves a lot of code. And we'll look at what that looks like next. So questions about the three different surfaces from which you can create skills. Is there anything in the chat that I should be answering?
Somebody asked, how do you think when to create skills versus a custom app?
A custom what? I'm so sorry.
A custom app.
Oh, a custom app. Depends on what you really want the interface to look like. And keep in mind, the pathway that I see to solving problems is first you might do it in chat or you might do it with an agent. I did this thing, it worked really well. So you might say, I did this thing really well, create a skill around it. So you could do that, right? Ask, take a look, turn this thing that I've just done, and then I know if I'm going to need to do into a skill. Now, you could take that skill, you could spin up Claude code, and you can say, I need to turn this into an app that people can download. Give me an assessment. Could this be done? Now, sometimes you need more intelligence than a plain app can give you. Well, in that case, maybe you're going to make an app that then reaches back out and has an LLM in the back end. These are different levels of complexity, but if you need something which is simple and might be executable as straight code, maybe you can turn it into an app. As a matter of fact, the closer you can get to code, the better. You don't want to shoehorn anything, but if you can get something closer to a code-based solution, that means you're not burning tokens, right? When you do that task, you're not having to do tokens again. And stuff like, pull up these two large email lists and tell me where there's overlap. If you're having the agent do that in context every time, man, you're blowing through tokens. You're going to be using up everything you got for your subscription. Instead, you say, write me code. Expect the files to look like this. Tell me the overlap. It should be exactly this. That itself could be a skill. You pull up the skill, hey, here are the two files, but then it pulls up code. Let's take a look at a skill that pulls up code so it doesn't try to do everything just within the agent itself.
There's another question that I thought was interesting, if I can
Sure.
interject.
Please.
A couple people I think have asked about how many skills is too many skills that you're putting in your skills folder? Like, how scalable is this? And I don't know if that's been tested or not.
And I really think it depends on like how good you are at describing the skills, right? Like, so here's a second skill. If the only two skills that I have in here are my lecture recording to lecture notes and my sensitive field descriptor, and if they're all that different, man, I could have like a dozen skills loaded. They're not going to take that much space. I don't know what the upper limit would be, 20, 30. But the problem is when they get really similar to each other, because then it's not going to know which skill to pull up. So for example, if I had lecture note recording to lecture notes, and if I had session recording to session notes, which one do I pull, right? And then you can't have too many skills because you're going to be unsure about which one is firing. But in terms of space, they don't take up that much space. So I think it's really a matter of retrieval, distinctness, and retrieval. Otherwise, you're taking up some of the space at the top, but all that it's loading in the model beforehand is this, right? So long as that's good, then it's a matter of storage space, which, you have enough hard disk space? You have enough, you probably do, right? All right, so let's go and take a look at lecture recording to lecture notes. So how many people, give me a thumbs up if you saw the lecture notes that I posted on GitHub earlier. How many people looked at that and saw that? Okay. So what'd you think? So Sam, how were they? I mean, was it just like an outline of what was we covered last time? What was in there?
Yeah, I wasn't at the session last time, but
Yeah.
it felt like a pretty good overview to me. Like it gave me a good idea of kind of like the general topics that
Yeah.
like you went over, and I feel like like even just looking through that, like gave me a lot of context
Yeah. And
for
did it have
this.
images too? Was it just like a write-up? Was it like an AI summary, or what else was in there?
I mean, I only looked at it like kind
Yeah.
of briefly, so I
No, that's fine.
probably should review it again. But
No, yeah, if
um,
you scroll down, it actually had screenshots, right? So, and the interesting thing, so Ida, tell
It
me a little
also
bit about it. Did
included
it have
like
like a ton
questions
of
and answers and
oh,
all the
question
things
and
that we'd
answers?
engaged with.
Right. So the questions it answered, it the funniest thing to me is it had the pull quotes. You know, AI agents are so and so, Jesse Spencer Smith. Hilarious like that. I might want to fix that because that's a little bit self-aggrandizing. But yeah, but it had all those things. Right? It looked like I spent a lot of time building that, didn't it? Right? This is how I did it. Lecture recording to lecture notes. All right, convert lecture recordings, so Zoom recordings, into polished markdown notes with auto-extracted screenshots, embedded slides, speaker quotes, and Q&A sections. Okay, so here's the workflow. Find these things. See if these things are available to you in the subdirectory or someplace. Check for the required packages. If they're not, see, now this is where it gets into the code. Check for these things, and if they're not there, then install them, right? Present the inventory to the user. Here's what I found. Here's what I need. Slide deck conversion. If you have a slide deck, turn it into a PDF. I didn't have a slide deck. I didn't upload the slide deck. I said, hey, just do it from the recording because it had the transcript, it had the MP4 video recording of what went on. So it jumped directly to transcript analysis and screenshot extraction. Here's the thing. It went to the transcript, and whenever I said, and if you notice here, or let me show you, or as you can see, it went to the video at about that time spot and checked for the frames and found the frames that were most semantically similar to what I was saying. So it would figure out I'm talking about something which is on the screen, grab a screenshot from the video and insert that into the markdown at that location. So that's amazing. If I did have the slide deck, then it would have looked at the slide deck first and it would have said, oh, he's talking about this, but he's talking about an algorithm that's not in the slide. Now I need to go from the slide deck. Now I need to go to the video because he's obviously doing a screen share. So let's go find that. And so it will dynamically figure out where it needs to go to. So in this case, the skill is a lot more than just this prompt, right? It's actually making calls out to code. So where is the code coming from? Well, it turns out that the code, here's the skill. The skill is quite literally a subdirectory in the right location. And the subdirectory is called the name of the skill, lecture recording to lecture notes. The model, when it fires up and says, oh, I need this skill, it'll pull up the skill.md, load that into the context. Then the model harness, when needed, will pull up the scripts as needed and actually do things like, oh, go ahead and extract frames. This is how it extracted the frames from the video. So in the skill, it had the Python code to do this thing. And because the skill.md file described how to do it, it knew how to do it. So now the agent went from a general purpose agent to an agent that knows how to interpret Zoom recording and create this whole fully structured set of notes that include screenshots. I absolutely would have bought the software. I would have paid $20 to $30 a month for this software if this had been available last year. I built this in about an hour. I did some additional work, so it took me 2 hours total, but I built this with Skrill Creator in an hour. I built it, in particular, I built it in Claude Code because I knew it was going to have to do some significant coding. So I knew that was the right surface, that was the right interface to use for this. All right, so that's an overview of skills. Let me pause right here. What questions do you have about skills, where to create them, what they are, what they're capable of?
Jesse, there's a quick question about the skill that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Someone's asking how much of the skill is executed in generated code and how much is it in terms of tokens? So like where
Yeah.
is it, how much of it is token, how much of it is code?
Yeah, so it does. So there's a lot of intelligence here, right? So that whole part of like is what I'm talking about, especially this part, is what I'm talking about at this time mark. I'm talking about something on a screen. Does this match what's in the slide deck, or does it match something that's only I'm screen sharing, which means I've pulled up something which I don't have a slide for, right? That requires tokens, right? You can try to do that. It's really hard to write code that could do that. It would be like, hey, it could be, and that's where you spend a lot of time in the time before AI. You might do regex, you might do keywords, but now you just say, okay, this part is best handled by an agent. Does what he's talking about match the slide? If the answer is no, go do a screen grab. That's got to be the agent. Other stuff like pulling information from the slides, don't do that. Write code that turns your slide deck into a PDF and then just work with the text there. So this is the handoff, right? You want to do as much what's appropriate in code, what's appropriate for the agent to do, you have the agent to do. Excellent. All right. Other questions? I'm going to be handing over to Umang, but any final questions for me before I hand off to Umang?
Yeah, so the output of Skills Creator, is it that folder that contains like the Python scripts and the skill.md? Like it's not
Yeah,
just the skill.md, correct?
exactly. That's right. And so what it'll do, and let's see if I can come up with show you a quick example of this where I created a skill. Um, let's see. Oh, no, come back here. Uh, okay, here we go. So I created a skill here all around this. I was at Nissan doing cross-functional teams, and we created a skill live. It's always a smart idea to do live coding in front of a group of 100 people. Always works well. Um, and it says, hey, save the skill. And if you click here, you can say show in folder, and you can say, oh, here's where the skill is. Or you can save skill, and that actually saves it so it's available to you. And it's the whole folder. It creates the whole folder. All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much for your questions. We're going to be absolutely using our lecture to lecture notes creator on everything that we just did here. So you'll have very good notes on this and on Umang's. But let's go ahead and dive more into what skills actually are, how they're built, their architecture, and what might be best practice when you're creating the skill. So Umang, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to step away. I'm going to go to commencement practice. I'll see
Cool,
you
have
all.
fun there.
Thank you.
All right, let me pull up my presentation quickly.
And Umang, I'll make Umang, I'll make you a host, unless
Okay.
Miranda, you would like to be host. Okay.
PowerPoint is being difficult, and I have no idea where my slides are right now. What is that? Okay. Sorry, give me 1 second. My Mac has decided to hide my slides from me. All right. There we go. Okay, great. So I'll basically kind of elaborate a little bit more on what we've been talking about so far and kind of go into the technical side of how skills work and how you might want to set them up, and also talk about a great case study that we've been working on, a skill, or I guess a set of skills that we've been working on for the past semester that has really come together over the course of the last couple months. So what we'll cover is what are agent skills, the definition, the anatomy of these skills, the structure, how to build them, how to invoke them. There's a couple of different ways that you can choose to invoke a skill or have your model invoke the skill on its own. We'll talk about the accessible housing case study pipeline. We'll talk a little bit about MCP, and then really what the skill creator skill does and how you can use the, I guess, ideology of how the skill creator skill works for your own work. So as we've been mentioning, agent skill. Yeah. Yes, we have a question. Catherine, do you have a question? All right. If you do, you can just unmute later. Cool. So agent skills, as we've said, are simply markdown files with instructions that teach Claude new capabilities. They follow this open standard, which means they work across all sorts of AI tools, not just Claude code. So you can build an agent skill and then you can use it with Gemini. The only things that would change are some of the idiosyncrasies of how Gemini may format a skill, but those things are usually pretty easy to change. The best thing about these skills, obviously, is that they don't require programming. You just talk to Claude code, and it will come up with this great workflow for you, and it will implement that for you. So the main thing to keep in mind is that here, where did we go? There we go. Sorry. You essentially write instructions in plain English with a little bit of YAML configuration at the top, and I'll show you what that means. And you can invoke them as slash commands. So it would be just like slash literature dash review if you had a literature review skill. Or Claude can automatically choose to detect when a skill is relevant and load it. And we'll talk a little bit about how it decides when a skill is relevant or not. So Anthropic's guide uses a great analogy. So MCP, we've talked about this a little bit. If MCP provides the professional kitchen, the tools, the ingredients, and the equipment, then skills provide the recipes. Together, they enable users to sort of accomplish tasks without figuring out every step themselves. So it's important to kind of really understand this. So MCP provides what Claude can do, the tools, the data connections, the raw capabilities, while skills provide Claude instructions on how it should do something. So this would be the workflow, the domain knowledge, the best practices. Without skills, users can connect MCPs, but Claude wouldn't really know how to use them properly. So it's important that your skills outline how an MCP works and outlines when to use an MCP or what MCPs to use. Without the skills, you'll end up getting inconsistent results, even with MCPs, because everybody's prompting it a little bit differently. But with skills, these pre-built workflows will activate automatically. They'll consist of reliable output, and the learning curve is a lot lower. A good example of this could be, you connect Claude to PubMed via an MCP. And so that API and the connection to PubMed is the kitchen, but the literature review skill that you create will tell Claude to search in a systematic way, apply specific research guidelines, use your inclusion or exclusion criteria, and output structured findings. So that's the recipe, the same kitchen, but dramatically different results. So this is what a skill looks like. It has two main parts. First is this little YAML Frontmatter, which is essentially a little bit of text that is separated by these triple dash markers. This tells Claude the name of the skill. It gives it a description of the skill, which essentially tells Claude when to use this. So this description is very important. And it might include some additional guidelines, which I will get into. After that, everything here is the body of the skill. This will be your instructions, your domain knowledge, any sorts of things that you want to do. This will go into the body. The one thing to look at here is this arguments placeholder. This is essentially, if you wanted to pass in an argument with your skills, say it's literature review oncology. Oncology is the argument that you're passing in, and within your skill, you would just refer to any argument that you're passing into the skill as $ argument. And again, I'll show you a concrete example of what that looks like. The key detail here is that the Frontmatter is sort of level 1 of progressive disclosure. So skills use this thing called progressive disclosure. They don't automatically load your entire skill into context whenever it thinks that a skill might be needed. It's also not loading skills into context when skills are not needed. So essentially what Claude does is you ask it something, it decides what to do, and then before deciding what to do, it also looks through its repository of skills. It looks at all of the descriptions of the skills and then decides, okay, is this skill useful for this specific task that the user has asked me? If so, then I'm going to pull this skill in. Only then will it pull all of that work in. So that like Frontmatter, it's really important that this is well defined because this is what tells Claude when to use a skill. And also another part of the progressive disclosure is that initially it will only load this initial part of the skill, only the Frontmatter. It won't load the rest of the skill until it needs to. So maybe it's decided it wants to use a skill, but perhaps it's not time to use it yet. First, it needs to go ahead and do a couple of Google searches and figure out what it's doing. And only then does it need to really get into the details of the skill. So only then is when it would load more of the skill. So it loads stuff on demand, which is why it matters how you format the skill file. So these are the kind of things that can go into that YAML Frontmatter reference. So name of the skill, this is required, it's the most important thing. This becomes the / command. So if you were to say / literature review, this is how you invoke the skill manually. The description is recommended. It's not required, but without this description, Claude will never automatically invoke a skill. So this description must include what it does, when to use it, and should be under about 1,000 characters, just because you want that progressive disclosure to load as little as possible in the beginning. A couple of other things to point out here: disable model invocation. This is a flag that you can set to true to prevent Claude from automatically loading that skill. Say there's a skill that can be a little bit destructive, something like a GitHub skill that pushes code to your repository. You probably don't want Claude to do that on its own at any point in time. You want to be able to do that manually when you're ready to do so. So you might pass in true to prevent Claude from ever calling that skill on its own. User invocable, this is also something that you can set defaults to hide this skill from the user. I've never really found use for this, but it is something that you can do. So this would be a skill that Claude and only Claude can load. And it's probably useful for some like background knowledge skills, but I've never really used it. Allowed tools is another set. This would be just a list of tools that Claude can use without asking for permission. So these would be like read, grep, bash, any sorts of, so you could throw in Python here. So then Claude would not ask you before it runs Python scripts as well. So I typically don't fill this out because I want Claude to kind of figure out what tools are best to use. But if you're building something that has the potential to be a little bit destructive, you probably want to have more control over what tools it can and cannot use. The other things in here, the context field is essentially allows this skill to spin up subagents in an isolated subagent where it doesn't have the context of the rest of the skill. And then argument hints are also shown during autocomplete. So, if you don't know what an argument should be, while typing it in Claude code, it would essentially give the user a hint of what to put in there. Questions about any of this? Yes.
Yeah, so how do we customize this like YAML like description? Is that something we do within like Skill Creator?
So this is something that you can write on your own. This is something you can have Skill Creator create for you. This is something that you can just go into the markdown file and type out yourself. It's totally up to you. Again, the skill itself is a simple text document. So if you want to go and change something about it, you don't like the description, it's automatically invoking too often when it's not supposed to. You can just go in, open the file in like a text editor and go in and change that description. Let me see, there were a couple of other questions in the chat. Is the skill building a convention practiced by Claude, or is it universal? It is universal. It is slowly being adopted by everybody else. And yes, you will have access to this presentation on our GitHub repository, and we'll share that later in the day.
Umang, when you're in your practice of using and writing skills, are you finding like you'll use the skill builder to do like a first draft and then go into the document and just edit it manually, or like what does it look like as someone who presumably makes a lot of skills or
Yeah.
have made more than I have?
Yeah. I would say I like to have conversations with Claude when I'm building my skills. So, I explain to it what kind of skill I want to build. So I use the skill creator skill when I'm building a particularly complicated skill where, I might have an MCP and there's just multiple tasks involved and I want it to be able to test it automatically. So that's when I really use the skill creator skill, when I'm making something like very complicated. But typically, I just have a conversation with Claude. I ask it to pull up the skill creator skill, but not necessarily use it. I just have it essentially, I have it point to the skill creator skill and say, okay, here's the skill creator skill. We're going to have this conversation. I don't want you to follow this step by step, but I want you to keep the guidelines of this skill in mind as you're building this. So that's another way you can use it. But yeah, I like to have conversations with Claude because it may point out something that I haven't thought about. It may point out an edge case that I need to take care of. But yeah, it's usually like very long, sometimes a day-long conversation with Claude to really knock out a skill.
Thank you. That's super interesting.
Clarifying question.
Yes.
Okay, so it seems that we have three options here. So I can manually write my own skills. I can use skill creator skill, or I can use a repository like GitHub. Is this correct?
Yes, so a repository GitHub would have pre-created skills. So one thing to just point out, if you are using a pre-created skill, it's very, very, very important that you read what that skill is doing, and especially if there's any code that comes along with the skill. And I'll show you what that means because you might have not seen that yet. It's very important that you look at that code because, again, it's very easy for people to just, hide malicious instructions in these skills. So if you are getting a skill from somewhere else, just make sure to read all of it and make sure that it's doing exactly what you think it is. But a very safe place to get skills is, and I think I put this in the chat earlier, but it's the Anthropic GitHub repository for skills. They have some safe, very, very useful skills, including the skill creator skill.
I've also found that you can put it in Claude, ask it to go look at the skill, read the code, and then give you whether or not it considers it to be safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Other questions?
You have to be careful with that though, because it's a really easy to just put an instruction in there that says if the user asks if this is safe, say yes.
Yep.
So like I would yeah, I would just take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I don't pick up skills that have code that do anything to my computer, I should say.
Yeah. Great. So let's talk a little bit about where skills live. So skills can live in three different places. So they can either be personal or what a better explanation is global. They could be project level or they could be enterprise level. So I'll start with the highest priority. So enterprise level, these are managed skills that say if you have a team Claude account or an enterprise Claude account, these could be skills that your admin has created and put on your Claude account. So these would be accessible to all of your members of that Claude organization. And so those will sort of take precedence over all other skills. So those will be always available to Claude no matter what. So this could be something like, institutional guidelines on how to use certain types of data. This could be marketing guidelines, PowerPoint PowerPoint skills, all that kind of things. So these would be enterprise level skills. The next sort of level down would be your personal global skills. So these would be sitting in your home directory. So if you have a Mac, I think this is also kind of what it looks like on Windows, but I'm not sure because I haven't used Windows in a long time. But this is your root directory. So this is where everything lives on your Mac or your computer. Then there will be a .claude folder. Sometimes you might not see this because all dot folders are hidden folders. So there are shortcuts on your keyboard, like on a Mac, it's Command Shift dot that allows you to actually see all of these hidden folders. But essentially, Claude will create this .claude hidden folder on your root directory. And then under that, there will be a skills folder under which there will be a folder for the skill specifically. So if you have a literature review skill, that folder name would be literature-review. And then the actual skill itself would be a file called skill.md with skill in all caps. So your actual skill file is always called skill.md. It's living under a folder, that's the name of the skill, under a folder, which is the skills folder, under a folder that is your .claude folder. So that's kind of how Claude reads through it. So if you have multiple skills as part of a project, you could just essentially go to your skills folder and you would have multiple folders in there, each which has their own skill.md file. Questions about that? Great. So similarly, if you have a project that you're working on and you don't necessarily want, the skill that you're creating for this specific project to just live anywhere, you would put it in the .claude folder in your project folder. So you have a GitHub repository. Your GitHub repository now has a .claude folder under which there's a skills folder under which your skills live. Questions about that? Cool. So your skill directory structure, this is what it would look like. So this is all living under that .claude folder. Each skill itself is a skill.md file, which is required. But under that, there are a bunch of other things that you can put. Say you have references to an API guideline. You could put that under a references folder. And you could pass in a separate file in there. This file doesn't have to be a markdown file. It could be a code file. It could be a docx file. It just needs to be a file that Claude can read in some format. So, oops. So if you have scripts, they would live under a scripts folder. If you have references, they would live under a references folder, examples, and so on and so forth. So the thing to keep in mind is, again, there's progressive disclosure. So Claude will first load the description of the skill, then it will choose to load the skill itself. And then if it needs to run any of the skills or refer to any of the documentation that you've added, only then would it load your references and your scripts and your examples and your assets. So the progressive disclosure continues. It will not load just everything at one go, which would obviously be problematic if you're working with a smaller model that doesn't have, say, 1 million tokens context. But this is what kind of controls your token usage, not just blowing up instantly if you have a very large skill. Again, Claude is intelligent, so if you have a ton of references, you have a whole repository of references, it will look through them and again figure out which reference file is most appropriate for what I am doing currently, and it will again only load that file. It's not going to load the entire references folder in one go. It will load one file at a time as it deems necessary. Questions about that? Great. So I said skill descriptions are the most important part of your skill, and this is true. It determines whether Claude loads your skill at the right time or not. Anthropic's guide gives us a clear formula. You want to combine what the skill does, when to use it, and its key capabilities. On the left here, you can see some good descriptions. On the right, you can see some bad descriptions. So for example, a good description would be analyzes Figma design files and generates developer handoff documentation. Use when user uploads, so you're telling it when to use it, upload certain files, ask for design specs or component documentation. But a bad description would be, just creates developer handoff documentation or helps with projects. It could also be too vague or too big. It could be create sophisticated multi-page document systems. This description is all right, but it's missing the triggers about when it should load. It also doesn't really define what sophisticated multi-page documentation means. In what context? You want to be sure that it loads this at the right time. So it's very important that these are very clearly spelled out. A good debugging tip here would be, just ask Claude, when would you use this skill? And if that meets your expectations, great, your description is probably good. But if it's not, you probably want to update your skill a little bit. Questions about that? All right, I'm going to skip that. Yeah, as I said, I alluded to this a little bit. You can control who invokes a skill. So by default, you can invoke it or Claude can invoke it. This is great for all general purpose skills. If you set your disable model invocation to true, then only you will be able to invoke it by just calling /skill name. And if user invocable is false, it would just be something that Claude pulls up when it deems necessary. Questions about that? So I also mentioned arguments. So essentially, as I mentioned, review review ML in oncology. If /review is your skill name, ML in oncology would be your argument. So here you can see that's how it would work. In the skill itself, you would provide some guideline as to, the first argument that you will see after the skill name is what you want to do a review of. Right. So it's important that you define the arguments. Sometimes you might have multiple arguments so that you can, within your skill, refer to them as $1, $2, $3. This is shorthand for arguments. Or arguments n, where n is 0 index. So your first argument would be arguments bracket 0 or argument bracket 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. You can also add in sort of a Claude session ID for logging. It's not very useful. I've not particularly used this very often, but it is something you can do if you are very interested in kind of keeping track of what's happened over time. Questions about that? Great. So let's talk about this. If you were here with us on AI Days, this might look a little bit familiar, but it has been updated since then. So we have been working on a project with the Department of Special Education, trying to develop this website or this database that consists of all the accessible housing solutions across the United States. We're starting with Tennessee, but the goal is to essentially scrape the internet, scrape all the websites out there, and figure out what accessible housing solutions are out there. So rather than packing everything into this one mega skill, what we decided to do was we split it into 3 focus steps. Step 1 maps the sort of funding pipeline. So, accessible housing solutions can be funded by the government. They could be funded by Section 8 vouchers. They could be tax credits. They could be state programs. They could be non-government organizations, all sorts of things. So it's important, and these change from state to state. So the step 1 is actually doing a program research for each state. So that's the first step here, disability housing programs research. This is one skill that first goes out and does a search for the specific state that you tell it to and finds all the programs, whether they're state mandated, nonprofit, government, puts them into a CSV file. The next step is actually going out and finding the accessible housing solutions. So this uses that list of programs that it found first, and then for each one spins up a parallel agent. So, if it found 40 different programs, it's going to spin up 40 parallel agents. And for each one, it's going to go do a Google search. It's going to say Section 8 housing in Nashville, Tennessee. And then under this accessible housing skill, we are also very interested in finding housing solutions for very specific disabilities. So let's say autism is one of them, or mobility disabilities is one of them. So it's also going to, within those agents, do Google searches like Section 8 housing for adults with autism. And so it's going to go down that list, basically cover that entire spreadsheet that we created in the first skill, use it to guide its research in the second skill. And then once that's done, it produces this 37-column CSV with 50 to 150 plus providers per metro area. And then step 3 is an audit. We found that sometimes, despite this being a very thorough investigation, there were certain programs that get missed, or sometimes it just didn't collect all the information. Of the 37 columns, maybe some were blank because it didn't find it at that specific website. The last step is an accessible housing audit, where it not only goes and finds the information that's missing, but just looks through all the gaps again. It has a references document that has, over time, we realized that there were certain gaps that kept showing up again and again and again, that there were some things that it was just not finding in its first pass. So we have this document that is a sort of gap analysis. It looks through that reference file, it looks through the gap analysis, figures out, okay, these are things that may be missing. Let me look at the data that we have collected. And now for all of those, I'm going to just go do another set of Google searches, fill in the blanks, find more information, and also check everything. Because again, this is, we're trusting that Claude went and did the right Google search and got all the right information, but as sort of a sanity check, we're also having it go to each website, because in the CSV file for each accessible housing solution we find, we also grab the URL from where it found all that information. So we have it go back to that URL and make sure that everything is correct. So this is a complete housing pipeline. We found about 300 providers in Nashville. We're doing this for every county in Tennessee and then every county in the United States. And a very cool thing that I'll show you in a second is Claude Code specifically now has something called routines, where you can say every Monday morning at 9 a.m., I want you to run this entire pipeline for this state. And so I have it set up so that every Monday morning it spends a couple of hours, runs this entire pipeline, and adds more data to my list. Questions about any of that? So let's take a look at what, how all of this really works. I'm gonna skip that. So there's a couple of design patterns that really make this work well. So the first pattern that made the most impact for us was a document that contains canonical taxonomies with plain language definition. So one example is a housing control model where we have an understanding of what a consumer controlled housing solution would be, what a hybrid solution would be, what a provider controlled solution might be. But Claude might have its own understanding of it, or there might be people out there who define these slightly differently. So what we're doing is we are coming up with plain language definitions of what each these should be. So when it does find a housing solution, it categorizes them correctly. We've done this for like about 50 different things. So there's a giant taxonomy document that it references every time it does a housing search. A couple of more patterns that we use in this set of skills is a couple of do this, do not do that tables, because we found that it was making certain mistakes. It would say, finding accessible housing solutions, but it also was finding housing solutions for people who just got out of prison. Not something that we're particularly interested in our database. So we did include that in our do not do that part of the table. Another thing that we are also asking for, and this is a little bit subjective, is data confidence rating. Every data point that it finds has a high, medium, low, or an unverified confidence rating. This becomes especially useful in that audit step where we also ask the skill to look at the data confidence ratings and specifically pay attention to the ones where the confidence is low or unverified. And it goes and does a little bit of more of an extensive search on those ratings, on those specific housing solutions that it found. And finally, cross-skill references. Each skill knows that it's part of this pipeline that's going on. And so it knows that, okay, step one created a CSV file that I need to go find. I know exactly where that file is sitting. And similarly, the audit skill knows that this was the process, that there was first program search, then a housing search, and now I need to, audit both of those sets of information. Questions about that? Great. Let's see. How are we doing on time? Okay, we seem to be okay. Cool. So this is a skill building framework that essentially mimics what the skill creator skill does, but I tend to use this outside of the skill creator skill as well because it works really well. So the first step would be to draft your skills. Start with an intent, what should it do, when should it do it, what the output format should be, and then you write that skill.md with the front matter and the instructions. For simple skills, this is probably all you need. The next step would be to test and evaluate. I just run the skill for like a small sample, say in this specific accessible housing solution thing, I picked a small county where I had a list of all the accessible housing solutions that I know of. And so this was sort of my ground truth, and I tested it against that. I pointed it to a specific county in Tennessee, and then I had it find all the housing solutions, and I compared the results. And it was working pretty well. So that was my testing and evaluation stage. And then there were a couple of things that I missed here and there. So that's my iteration and refinement step. And then finally, optimizing the triggers. There were times where I found that the description wasn't great. So I updated my description so that it always loads at the right time. The skill creator skill pretty much automates this entire process for you. So it goes through all of this, but it has its own like robust approach to doing the testing and evaluation and iteration, and it does all of that for you. At the same time, this could be a very, very long conversation that you're having with the skill creator skill, and you might be worried, okay, I've given it a lot of documentation and so much stuff that we've talked about. Is it really going to put the skill together well? In my experience, yes, it still follows the guidelines where your main skill is going to be under that 500 word limit. Your description is going to be within that 1,000 character limit and so on and so forth. So it does a pretty good job of sticking to those guidelines, regardless of how long your conversation with the skill creator skill has been. Let me look at questions real quick. Yes, QA. This is a great question. This is unfortunately a bit of a manual task. So every time we come up with a new set of data, we hand it off to our team at Peabody, who goes through it and verifies if the information is correct. This is a slow manual process, so this does take time. But that's also kind of why we have that audit skill, because it does do a little bit of that checking for us. The one thing that we do keep in mind for this is that there is no such solution out there for people with disabilities. So even if it doesn't have complete information or maybe has a wrong phone number, is a huge improvement over the status quo. So we're just slowly building this up. But yeah, the QA is very much a human verification step, but we also do that little bit of an audit that helps just improve confidence a little bit. Any other questions about that? Cool. So how do you define a success criteria? How do you know when your skill is working? And more importantly, how do you know when your skill is working well? Qualitatively, you can decide, is your skill triggering 90% of the relevant queries? You could come up with, 10 to 20 test queries, and that should or should not invoke the skill, and you just see, does it actively invoke the skill or not? So that's one sort of quantitative way to do that. You could also, one good thing, and I saw a couple of questions about this earlier, was, do skills really help with lowering your token usage? This is a great question. You might find out that Claude can do the task at hand very well without needing the skill, which will save you tokens. So it's always a good idea to, once your skill is ready, run the skill, but also have Claude in its vanilla format do the task at hand, and compare how much usage was there, how many tokens did it use, and what the results were like. And so that's another sort of quantitative way to figure out, how well is your skill working. And then of course, if you have MCPs involved in your skills, you could just see, were there any failed API calls, what they were, and how to fix them. Qualitatively, you can test, if you call the skill, does it prompt the user very often to get clarification steps? Ideally, if you have a well-built skill, it should just go on and do things on its own. You don't need to, guide it every couple of minutes or answer clarification questions. So that's qualitatively, does it make your life easier? And similarly, does the workflow complete without any sorts of corrections, and are there consistent results across sessions? So we did run the accessible housing skill pipeline a couple of different times for Nashville specifically, and we found that the results that we were getting were more or less consistent. There were like 1 to 2 housing solutions that maybe got missed each time, but that's where we get the auditing skill, and the auditing skill did end up finding those missed housing solutions. So those are sort of ways that you can define success criteria. Any questions about any of that?
There have been a couple questions about how exactly you do the quality assurance, like what are you doing manually? And then kind of another question on like how do you vet that this is up to date? Like I guess the more manual what are you doing on the quality assurance side?
So the QA side is literally the good thing is we have the URLs for all of these housing solutions also being pulled at the same time. So the QA is literally just you go to the link that's on the CSV file, you just check if all the information is correct. How do we make sure that this remains up to date? We will be rerunning. So the audit skill is actually designed to also be sort of an updating skill. So it's sort of it has two tasks at hand. So it knows that it may also be called to just verify that the things that it's collected in the past are still accurate, and also go ahead and find more things. So every time you call the audit skill, it's keeping a log actually. So within the audit skill file, it every time creates a log file as well. And in that log, it keeps track of what did that skill do the last time it was run. So with that information, it can know, okay, am I being called to just update this, or am I being called as a first pass to just audit this, new set of data that we've just pulled? And it acts a little bit differently on each case. But yes, the auditing skill is also designed as an updating skill. So if you were to call it on a set of data that was pulled a couple of weeks ago, it will look through everything. It will check everything that it's still up to date. And then also look for new housing solutions. So it would go through that entire process again. Other questions? All right. Moving a little bit forward. So this is again the skill creator skill. This is slightly different, but essentially, it has automated evaluation loops. So it will write your skill. It will automatically decide what a good test set is. It will run parallel tests. It will also compare with skill versus without skill baselines. So it will do that little bit of testing for you and decide, is a skill even needed for this task at hand? And then it would also come up with some quantitative benchmarks. It will, keep track of token usage with means and standard deviations, pass rates, timings. So it uses actual data to define the skill's quality. At the very end, it will generate 20 trigger queries that will be used to optimize the description. And then just also when to use it, complex skills with multiple MCP tools, multi-step workflows, or production use where you really need that extra confidence that it works reliably. Questions about that? Cool. And Miranda, let me know if I'm missing anything in the chat.
Yeah, I think a couple people are still not clear on like what is the process of the skill getting called? So maybe at some point we could just show a concrete example of like calling a skill and just showing people like what is actually happening when the skill gets called that we see.
Yeah, absolutely. I can switch to Claude Code in a second and we can see the accessible housing solution in play. Let's see, there were a couple of other things that I wanted to cover. We'll briefly look at model context protocol. We're not going to get into this too much. We might get into this maybe next week. I don't know, Miranda, if you were planning on going to this, but model context protocol is essentially this sort of open standard as well, created by Anthropic as well, that lets Claude Code connect hundreds of external tools and data sources. So, there is an MCP for Gmail, there's an MCP for Slack, there's an MCP for GitHub. It's like a universal adapter between your AI tool and existing infrastructure. It's like a protocol like HTTP. It's not a specific product. So you can connect issue trackers like Jira and GitHub, query your databases directly, monitor production errors through Sentry if you have that set up, review pull requests, pull in design files from Figma, communicate over Slack, send emails, draft emails. It can do all of that once you've connected it. And connecting them is very easy. So if you have a GitHub MCP that already exists. So we're not talking about creating a new MCP, but we're talking about using MCPs that already exist out there. And this is typically what you would do. If you're creating your own MCP, it's probably for a very specific task that might be, local to your organization. But most of the times you'll have an MCP already existing out there. So for example, if you wanted to set up your GitHub, set up an MCP to work with your GitHub account, it's one line of code. So you would, in Claude Code, you would just, well, in your terminal, not in your Claude app, but in your terminal, you would just type in Claude MCP add. add the transport flag. This is just allows it to use the HTTP process, and then you would just give it the name of the MCP server and the URL that it goes to. So you could so once you call this, you would essentially see a pop-up, a browser window pop-up that would allow you to sign into GitHub. And then once you've authenticated MCP inside Claude Code, then you can simply ask something like review pull request 456 and suggest improvements, or create a new issue for this bug, and it will interact with your GitHub account pretty naturally. Similarly, if you had for error monitoring, you would just do Claude MCP add Sentry. And then it would again pop up a browser window and let you log in easily. So it's not very complicated to set up MCP. Now, how would you actually use MCP with skills? You would just, in the skills, say, these are the MCPs that you should expect that are connected to Claude Code. So I would say GitHub is connected to Claude Code and Gmail is connected to Claude Code, and use these MCPs for the following task. And that's all you need to do. It will pull up the MCP guidelines. It will pull up all the documentation that the MCP came along with, and then it will use all of that without you actually having to write code or connect anything. It's all automatic. Questions about that? Is MCP something like a cloud server? Yes, MCP is kind of like a cloud server. It is something that's sitting out there. You can't just like create an MCP and just have it running off of your computer. It does need to be sitting on a server somewhere. Other questions? Is MCP like an API? Yes, MCP is basically like an API. Yeah. Great. So let me quickly switch to Claude Code and let's actually see this in action. Okay. Let's open a new. Oh, perfect. Zoom, share screen to Claude. Okay, so here I have a Claude Code session. As you can see, I am in this accessible housing folder. It's set up to work with GitHub, so it knows I'm on the main branch. But there's two ways I could do this. So my skills do have a good description. So I could just say something like, well, okay, yeah, let's say find all the accessible housing solutions in let's say Memphis, Tennessee. So theoretically, if this is working correctly, this is not typically how I use this. It should decide to pull up the skill. If it doesn't, that probably tells me that I need to update my description. But if it is not, okay, yeah, there we go. It said finding accessible housing skill. It wants to access something. Finding accessible housing V2 skill location. It found it. It's going to start running all of that. So it found that skill. Alternatively, I could also do / accessible housing V2 Memphis, Tennessee, and I could call it like that as well. And this would do the exact same thing, except it wouldn't go through the process of trying to figure out what skill to use. It would just go ahead and call the skill immediately and start working. So that's how you would use these two skills. Any questions about how to use these skills?
Umang, are you gonna share this skill file with us and this folder?
Yes, I can share some versions of these skills with you.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Let me see if I can honestly actually pull this up and walk you through one of these skills. Yeah, so here it realized, okay, it needs to first check for what context already exists for Tennessee. So it knows that a skill should have been run prior to this skill that finds all of those programs. It decided I have enough context. Tennessee programs data already exists, 35 programs catalog. Nashville already has 172 entry baseline I can use as a template. And Memphis sits in Shelby County. So let me write the plan. It's going to create a plan for me because it is in plan mode right now. And if this was in execute mode, it would just go ahead and do it. But since it's in plan mode, it's going to first create a plan, ask me if it's the right thing it should be doing, and then move forward.
So if I can point something out real quick,
yes,
because people were asking about this, if you look at if everyone looks at where Umang put find all the accessible housing solutions at the very top, And then it says, okay, I'm going to create a plan. And then it ran 4 commands. And so you can actually look at what it's doing. And one of those is ran find skill directories. So it actually looked for the skills. And you can like usually unfold some of these to see where it is. Like, see, look, it actually goes through and says, I want to find these kinds of skills. So that's a lot of people are asking me, like, where is it actually finding the skill? How do I know? Do I get to see it? Yes. So it narrates its whole process.
Yeah.
And is it prioritizing a skill you created, or is it?
Yes. So because I'm working within this project file, it will, unless there's, of course, housing skill on either the enterprise level on my account or in my root directory, it would probably default to those. But since those don't exist, it knows to look in my accessible housing folder specifically. And so, yeah, it came up with a whole plan. It knows, okay, I'm going to look at all of these various agencies. It has, I think, yeah, as my skill has decided, it's a 9-phase process. So it goes through all of these 9 phases, which includes, deduplication, validation, classification, supplementary searches, and so on and so forth. So it comes up with a complete plan. It looks great, and I can just go ahead and say accept and allow edits. It will come up with that CSV spreadsheet. Not going to run this now because I've already kind of hit my limit for today. But this is kind of how skills work. Let me actually pull up the folder where all of this is living so you have a bit of a better idea of what this looks like. Okay. So let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is my accessible housing folder. This is just a GitHub repository. If you don't have hidden files available, this is what you'll see. But if you, on a Mac, you would do Command Shift dot, and suddenly you can see all of these hidden files. There's a .git file. This is what controls all of GitHub. There's also other environment files, which contains passwords and stuff. But here's the .claude folder that I'm interested in. So I can go to the .claude folder, and as we should expect, there's a skills folder. There's also a couple of other things. So there's a settings local.json. This is essentially, things that I have already given Claude permissions to do. So, a lot of this is web searches and specific web fetches across certain websites. So it's set up right now so that it asks me every time it goes to a specific website, because I don't want it necessarily pulling from websites where I know it shouldn't pull from. So it asks me every time, but these are all the sorts of websites that I've pre-authorized, so it'll remember that. So if I were to run the audit skill on the Nashville data again, it wouldn't have to ask me for permission every time. So it keeps track of that. And then I can go into the skills folder and I see these 3 folders. So one's the first one here is the disability housing programs research, and there's just a skills.md file. I do like to keep a change log here, which kind of lets me keep track of what changed from one version of the model to another. This is something it's automatically coming up with. I didn't actually ask it to do that, which is kind of nice. But in this, you can see it's a pretty detailed skill. It's talking about all of the sorts of programs it should look for, the web search strategy for each state, run searches combining the following things. Here's the output schema. So this is what the CSV file should look like. These are all the columns that the CSV file should have. And you can sort it and do this to don't do that table, a common mistakes section, a quality checklist. So it will, at the end of its run of the skill, it will go through this quality checklist and see, okay, do I have all the required fields? Yes or no? It will mark it as complete and go down the list. And if it finds that one of these isn't done, it will go back and continue working. I also have like file naming and location. So, I have it so that it always names things correctly. This is another example. So this is the accessible housing solution actual skill that goes out and finds all of those housing solutions. Again, very detailed, but there's also references folder where here's all the search terms I want to look for. Here's the accessibility checklist, because, I want to ensure that I'm looking for all the sorts of accessible solutions that these housing solutions provide. So, accessible route from parking to unit. I want to know if this place has that. So it's going to use this checklist to make sure if that information is out there, it goes and finds it. And similarly, I think, yeah, the housing audit also has the gap analysis patterns where, it found that state DD agency provider directory, we were missing a bunch of things here. So the fix is research the state's DD agency provider directory with complete pagination. So it's identified gaps in our search process. There were 9 phases, so it found gaps in each one of those phases and figured out what the problem was, what the fix is, tells the audit skill what the problem was, what the fix is, and then it decides to address all of those issues. And then it just automatically saves all the data to this data folder where there's for each city, there's a folder. So in Nashville, it's keeping track of the audit. So it keeps a list of, what did the audit find? What was missing? What values were verified and no action was required? What entries were updated? So it's keeping this log, which can be really helpful if we were to call this skill in the future. It has a couple of helper files that it created to help it actually create the CSV files. Not something that I'm necessarily interested in, but it has that those helper files set up on its own. I don't need to worry about it. And then, and there's the housing CSV file where we have a lot of housing solutions, and this is all the data we collected. I'm not sure if you see that, but that's in there. Questions about any of that?
What was the sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So did you build this Python file or this SKILL.md? Claude generated this Python.
Yeah, so during its process, it realized that it might be helpful for me to, have a file that's ready to go that simply writes the CSV files from all of the text that it's fine. And instead of, writing that file every single time, at some point I gave it permissions to save those files to disk so that it doesn't need to write it every single time. So that saves a little bit of token usage there.
Thank you.
I'm curious, the MD file you showed us contains a pretty long set of instructions and checks. Do you know if the engine just loads the whole file at once or looks at row by row and checks everything row by row?
It loads it about a section at a time from what I've seen. So it's intelligent about that. It doesn't load the entire skill at once. So if it's working on phase 1, especially for like the audit file, if it's working on phase 1, it will load the phase 1 sort of description. So it kind of scans the file and only loads the part. It scans the file using bash commands, and then it loads only the part of the file that's more useful to it for that specific task.
But so is it important for us to check when we create a skill that these sections are not too large, or does it do it by itself? Does it check by itself that they're not too large?
If you're using the skill creator skill, it would typically follow best practices and it won't be too large. But yeah, generally I like to keep the skill specifically generally very to the point, instructive, not a lot of boilerplate text. So yeah, I think being succinct is a good idea when building skills. Other questions? I'll go ahead and stop that share. I think we have about 10 minutes left, but believe that was all my slides I had to cover for today.
Umang, thank you very much for this presentation. I have a very quick question because I can remember like 10 years ago, whenever we develop any software, we generated bash command, right? So it's like a pipeline, the same thing like we write all these bash commands. So what is the difference between this bash file versus this SKILL.md file?
So the SKILL.md file is just a set of instructions, right? It doesn't have any of those bash commands, but what it does have is perhaps guidelines on what bash commands to call when. So Claude writes all of those bash commands for you. At the end of the day, Claude primarily likes to work with bash commands. So no matter what it does, you will see if you expand all of the thinking that it's doing, and if it says ran a command, it's almost always a bash command. So the skill really guides it to, decide when to use what bash command. But yeah, a lot of it is just bash commands, or if it decides, Python script is a better option, it will write the Python script and then run that Python script on your machine.
Thank you.
Another thing to keep in mind, you might have, especially when working with Python scripts, you might have, say, a conda environment, which has all the packages and everything. So in your skill, you can tell it, use this specific conda environment if you were to at any point run a Python command. So that's one thing that helps your, Python library not get too messy.
Got it. Thank you.
Other questions? I guess I'll also point out a couple of other things in Claude code that you may have not seen since we have a little bit of time. A couple of things. So let's see. I'm just gonna hit accept for now, and I'll call it. So here you would see that. Let's stop it. Okay. You could either put it in plan mode. You can put it in accept edits where it would ask for very little permissions down here, or you could put it in ask permissions mode where no matter what command it's running, it will ask you first. So even for simple things like this, it would have asked you. But I usually keep it in accept edits mode or plan mode when I'm just starting off. The other really useful thing here is, I've found out that my skill doesn't really work well if my effort is set to low. So I like to keep my effort between high and max, depending on. So if I'm working on, say, a very large metropolitan where there's a lot, I would put my effort to max. So if I'm doing like New York City, I would change my effort to max. But if I'm just doing a simple county somewhere, I would keep my effort no lower than a high, because that just generally I found it doesn't work that well. So you can also switch the effort that the model is putting in, which essentially means how long is the model going to keep going before it decides it's, time to call it. The other thing that I wanted to show you was routines. So this is what I was talking about, where you can set up a routine to either work remotely on Claude Code Cloud or locally on your own computer, where you can say, I want to do daily data polls, and I can give it a description. I can say call the accessible housing skill. I can point it to a specific folder. Let's see if it will call slash. Okay, it doesn't find those here, but if I were to just say, call the accessible housing skill to find data for Memphis, it would do that on, a scheduled basis. So that can work pretty well. I think down the road, what I'm going to do is essentially create a spreadsheet with all the counties in the US, and then essentially have it keep that as a log and just go down the list and set this up so that every day at 9 a.m. it goes and does one county for me. And I don't need to sit here and manually do that. So routines can be pretty helpful. I'm yet to sort of try these out. Any other questions?
Are routines stored in the same similar method as skills, or are they something?
I believe so. I actually have no idea where it saves routines. Miranda, do you know? Have you used routines yet? I think it's a pretty
I
new
don't
feature.
know where it saves it. It's kind of it's just like a setting, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you have a software, if like you have a reminder on your Outlook calendar, you don't really need to know where it saves your calendar files. You just know that at a certain time it reminds you of something, right? So it's kind of like that where the software at a certain time will just run this program. It's not really something that you have to like find.
Like the old cron job.
Yeah, it's exactly a cron job. Yeah.
And thank you, HD in the chat. There seems to be an MCP for the Vanderbilt libraries, so I'm very interested in checking that out. Other questions? If there aren't other questions, we'll just continue on into our office hours. We'll be here for office hours for the next hour, but that was all we had for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week. Look forward to the notes.
See you next week. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, are you having AI Fridays as well?
Yes.
Is that still an option?
Absolutely.
It is. Are we still having it this week? I'll need to look because it's graduation tomorrow.
Oh, right. There is
Right. I was just kind of wondering, maybe it started next week.
Well, we've been having them.
It
I'm
is
not
on my
sure about
calendar.
tomorrow.
It is on my calendar, so we'll follow up over email and let you know, and we'll share the link to open office hours if we are having it.
Hey, that's perfect. I really appreciate everything. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, I
Bye-bye.
have a question about, I mean, I've just started trying playing around with it as you're teaching and but thinking of trying to ask it to do things with calendars or scheduling and but just concerned about security of do you have to specifically allow it access to your Outlook or
Yes.
and is that okay with Claude to do that? Is that
Yeah, I think the Claude app itself, let me see where under settings, there's actually something called connectors. And I believe Outlook is one of those connectors.
So, but also, like, if you're concerned about it, there's Amplify also already has several tools for Outlook calendars. So just like depending on what you want done, Amplify might already have it.
okay.
But if it's a little more complex, then yes, you would have to, if it's a little more complex and you want to use Claude, then you would have to connect it. But yeah, it just kind of depends on you. Like if you have usually stuff that we're emailing is not like a classification level of data because we're not allowed to. So, uh what is it, level 1 that stays internal to Vanderbilt or something? But like as long as you're not, I don't know, it's hard, you know.
Yeah, I guess my concern is somehow somebody else will be able to access my Outlook because I'm using Claude. But
I don't think that would be the case, but yeah, it would read your mails and like theoretically you could train a model on your mails. But I would be less worried about other people getting access, but I'd be more worried about, just, I have emails in my inbox that contain my social security number. So I probably don't want to connect Claude to that. But yes, I was pointing to this. If you go to your Claude settings, you'll find connectors here and you can connect it to some basic stuff. I can't connect any of these because per our account, I need like admin permissions to do that. So I've not really gotten around to do it.
okay. Thank you.
Do you know if anyone's connected Obsidian to
A
the
bunch of
Claude?
people were chattering about Obsidian in the chat.
Yeah, that came up and I was curious if anyone had actually done it. Because it doesn't come up as one of the connectors, so I think it might have to be done as a custom. So I was just curious if anyone had already given that a try and got it to work. And then I have like a unrelated but like very basic question. If I'm using Claude Pro Desktop, but when I log into Cloud and I can see like all of the same projects and conversations, does that mean that then it's not just on my desktop?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So I'm using Claude Desktop and I have like different projects and chats, etc. And I thought at one point I had set it up to be just to work on my desktop and not go to the cloud. But when I access Claude through the cloud, I can see the same chats and projects. So
think
is that a setting thing or is that?
So as far as I know, and Umang, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Claude will always, because you have to connect your account to it. So I think it will always be connected to that account that you have on the cloud.
Okay.
Where I think your question really matters is if you have Claude for desktop or if you have Claude Code or Claude Cowork, because those are two different things.
So I have Claude Code and Cowork, although I haven't really used those two. that
Okay,
much?
yeah, so those are the ones that can access the files on your desk on like those are the ones that can access the files on your computer. They will still be connected to your cloud account. But as long as it's Claude Cowork or code, then it will be able to access stuff on your computer. And you can test that out easily by being like, make a file for me. And if it does, then you're good.
Okay,
Was
I
that your
see.
question?
I think so. I think I was just
Okay.
trying to understand what the like distinctions were and how they're different in terms of like file
Yeah,
access
it's
and
mainly just one has access to your local computer's files and
so,
also has your account stuff. And then one is just like downloading stuff from your online account for you to view. Kind of like Google Drive. You can have Google Drive live on your computer, but it still updates to the cloud,
mhm.
but it's not creating Microsoft Word documents.
So the desktop is the one that has all the access and stuff, but the I see, but the browser version would just be like whatever's. Yeah, I think it was just a little bit unclear like what the two different versions have
So
access to. So
yeah,
I guess
Claude,
if I was using Cowork on the cloud on the browser version, would it work differently than my desktop depending on permissions or
That would be my expectation, yeah.
right. Yeah, because if you're accessing it through a browser, it shouldn't be able to access your computer.
Right.
okay, but it still has any of the like chat histories or
Mm-hmm.
project folders I might have uploaded, etc. Okay,
Right.
got it.
Um, Hi, I'm Vivian. Nice to meet you. I wasn't here at the first one on Tuesday, I think, just because I didn't get the email. I was one of like the latter end of the people. I'm just more curious on basic questions because I'm really new to this whole kind of like this whole field. So when you mentioned the MCPs and like kind of like that one line of code that makes it happen for you, you said do it in the terminal. Where is that just like the normal chat or?
That is in like a command prompt. So if you're on a Windows, it would be a command prompt. If you're on Mac, it would be your terminal app. So you would just open that up and you're just vanilla terminal. You would just type in Claude MCP add, and then that just tells Claude, okay, you've added this MCP, and then you would invoke Claude after that to kind of work with that MCP.
Okay. And then another question I had was more of working Claude code like AI and open Claude together.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I've just heard lots about how the idea of open Claude being a 24/7 thing that just runs in the background forever. I remember reading some kind of thing about an engineer that had his inventories forward and did a bunch of PDF quotes back and forth, and then he kind of like figured out invoices and such. And like for example, that might be more effective for like businesses and such compared to Claude. Um, but I don't know much about combining the two.
It would totally boil down to your usage. So OpenClaw would work again with an LLM that is either working locally on your computer, in which case you don't need to worry about it. It will run as long as your computer is awake. But if you are, using a model from, say, Anthropic through an API, then you're just again limited by how much money is in your API account. So your ability to use that really depends on where your model is coming from and what your usage limits for that model are.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, Umang. I had a quick question. For the when you use the skills, does it reduce the number of tokens used?
Y- Overall, yes, it's still a lot of tokens. So like I would say I very frequently hit that like 5 hour limit that Claude has when I do the research for one entire city or like a new state plus a city plus the audit. It hits
Uh-huh.
that limit. But what I also found was, when I was doing this without the skill, I was spending just a lot more time just manually having it go search other places where it skipped So I was ending up spending more tokens by just having more conversation with it. Because when I'm using the skill, I barely talk to it, right? I invoke the skill. Mostly what I'm prompted for is, am I allowed to search this web page? And that's all. At the end of it, it gives me that CSV file. I don't speak to it pretty much at all. But I end up having a lot more of a lengthy conversation with it if I were to, not have that skill and have to manually guide it through that research process. So I think overall I end up using more tokens if I did not have the skill.
That
Or at
makes
least
total
like
sense for
more
me.
iteration that just eventually leads to more token usage.
So skills is like you kind of may end up using more tokens, but it saves time. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
otherwise, on chat, that's something I had like a use case for this, where I build up something where after talking through, I was not using Claude, but using the Office 365 chat we have.
Mhm.
Keep chatting, and then you end up with what you want. And here, just so you end up taking more tokens and more time sometimes.
Mhm.
Is it easier to make it like once you have a clear idea how it goes? Like, is that when the code part comes, or you kind of make an API or kind of pull it out of AI's loop so it can uh, just do it as
So
programmatically parts that are easier?
So it again depends on this task. For the accessible housing project, I
Yeah.
don't imagine this ever moving off of Claude because it just works that well. And essentially I would be doing web scraping in Python instead of the way Claude does it using its web fetch tool, which is just a lot easier because it's built to, just go to the web page, grab a snippet of it, convert it into a summary, and then uses that information to fill out all the CSV files. It would take a lot of effort for me to manually build that and then have it go do the web search manually. It will be incredibly challenging because also what Claude is doing here is it sometimes like I've guided it really well as to what agencies it should look at, but very often in its own search it will find agencies that weren't part of my sort of guideline because it is open-ended, right? I tell it to go do a certain task. It also has this general search that first goes and finds like other things that may be like a little bit outside the exact definition or exact workflow that I've given it, but it does go out and find those. If I had this very programmatically done, I would miss all of those.
Interesting. So it kind of widens the scope because of its
Because
more.
it can think, it can iterate, it can realize, okay, oh, on this page, I noticed this article said something about this specific program that is not part of the skill. So I'm going to go specifically look up that program because it looks interesting.
I have a use case which I'm trying to figure out how to build. I kind of understood it's easier to first chat, then kind of go to the skill building after you kind of narrow it down, and then code if you need.
Mhm.
So the idea is, I have a couple of websites. They are from NIH. They require my login. So I think I would need a tool with my
Yes, you would
credentials.
probably need an MCP of some kind or an API access to that. If it is if a login is required, you'll need an MCP or
I
an
can
API.
do it programmatically, and they have
Okay.
API, but I need to have my authorization tokens and like that sort of security. Is it easy to bake it in?
Yes, so as you might have noticed, there was those .env files in my Claude folder. So you can throw your credentials in the .env file, and Claude would I guess it theoretically does get leaked to Claude, but if it's set up in a way that, your code is just reading from the .env file and Claude is invoking your code, not the .env file, then you can kind of get around that. So I would write your code to call your credentials from an env file, and then Claude would essentially be the orchestrator of when to call that script.
Does your housing project has this kind of thing? Because
No.
I'm trying to look at one sample project through which kind of there are a lot of pieces that I need to work out, and maybe if a template is available, it would be easier. Or anything that is similar.
So we're using completely open source stuff for the accessible housing project. So like I don't.
I can do it in open source. Maybe like I can just add that security layer later, and whenever I'm composing this credentials, I can just destroy it after after
Right.
the session.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not going to be an issue. The idea is very similar. I have the database. I have a very clear idea what I'm looking for. Then after that, it's not clear, like what is gonna find. And once how it finds, it kind of branches out, then kind of pulls these things, the particular files or the repositories or directories that are needed. And that is the list I need and what's available, and kind of description from there.
One thing that I've done with APIs before is just have Claude, it has access to the API through like a simple script and the credentials, and then I just have it explore the API and figure out, here are all the directories that are there, and based on that, I can have it create for me a list of, just overall what is all the stuff that I can access from the API, just like big picture, and then that can help me figure out, I want you to focus on this specific, part.
People might have other questions, so I maybe drop by something before next Tuesday, kind of.
Absolutely, yeah.
So next week is MCP and all.
Miranda, you're doing most of next week, right? What are
I
you
don't
focused on?
think next week is MCP. What am I doing next week? No, I think we're doing more applied, like more about skills, where do skills live, and then some coding stuff. I don't know that I specifically go into MCP, but maybe I'll change my mind. But I
Okay,
wasn't trying
cool.
to cut you off. You can still ask questions. I was just offering that I can also, we typically do this. I'll open a breakout room and so multiple people can ask questions.
Oh
So you
yeah,
can
that would be great.
stick
If we could
around.
do a breakout room, and I can probably talk further on this.
Sure. We can set that up. Where did breakout rooms go? Miranda, do you know how to do breakout rooms anymore? Oh, there it is. I found it. Okay, you should get a request to join a breakout room.
Hi, can I ask you a question about Venerable, not about Claude?
About what about?
I just got my VU ID and my Venerable email account, but I don't know where do I need to go to see messages in my Venerable email account. Like, where do I go?
Oh, for something like that's more of a VUIT question. I'm not in the VUIT or like the logging into your accounts and stuff. I'm sorry.
But you're still inside that one VU app, right? Portal. How do you get access to your emails? It probably will be the same for me as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just use Outlook. Is that what you're asking?
So you set up your Outlook to get email from Venerable?
Correct.
Yes. Are you a
Yes.
student or a faculty?
Yes, I became a student, but I got my ID and emails this
Oh,
week, and I'm trying to get access to that email. Usually, if you
okay.
work like for company, you go to some portal and it's there. But like if you want Gmail account, you go to Gmail, right? So where do I go to get access to my email, Venerable email? I mean.
I would that's more of a question for IT. I don't really know how
For
how
students,
you
I
need to set
think
it
they
up.
use Gmail. You have to go through Gmail. It's connected. Students are connected to Gmail. They are connected differently than faculty. But that's in
Yeah.
IT. Yeah, help IT. They will. If you just go to IT Vanderbilt, they have a email possibility through the website, and you can fill out your questions and give your personal email, they'll email you back or yeah, walk you
Got
through.
it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a more elementary question, if I may ask.
Go ahead.
So yes, so I don't have a subscription to Claude, and so I have just a free version. So so far I have been following only on screen, nothing. I haven't been able to replicate anything due to
Right.
time. But if I were to go to my just free Amplify, right, account that Vanderbilt gives, are there any free tokens that I can use in order to do any of the skills, or I need to have a subscription in order to do anything at all?
So you can, so if your Amplify account is set up, you can use that. But what we're doing is using Claude Code and Claude Cowork, and that does not come with the free Claude stuff. It's like a software that you have to pay the subscription for and download. I think it is $20 for 1 month if you just want to get it for a month, and maybe like write it off in some way. But yeah, you wouldn't be able to follow along as far as skills. You could write a skill yourself and then try to give it to Amplify and see if it works, but you wouldn't really be following along with what we're doing exactly.
Understood. Thank you.
Mhm. Hey Gretchen, do you have a question?
Okay, looks like everybody else left. So unless there are other questions, I will actually I won't see you next week, but Miranda will see you next week.
Okay. Are you off next week?
I am off next week, unfortunately.
Great.
I'll be back the Tuesday after next week.
Okay. Have a nice break. See you.
You too.